You see, something's going to happen.
What? What's going to happen?
Something wonderful.
What?
I understand how you feel. You see, it's all very clear to me now.
Welcome to the Occult Rejects. This episode, I got a bunch of rejects with me tonight. I got JJ Vance, not the vice president, with me. What is going on, sir? Please let everybody know. What is your deal?
Nick, greetings, sir. I appreciate the invite as always. I'm always excited to talk some Occult Rejects activities, especially with Headless and Ethan here. Greetings, gents. Right, great to join you again for a conversation. Looking forward to it. JJ Vance, not the vice president, host of Operation GCD. Despite what Grok AI tells you on Twixter, I am not the vice president.
Said you're lying. Thank you very much, sir. And your show notes will be in the bottom. The links for the street shows will be in the bottom. And Headless Giant, my man, please let everybody know what's going on with you, sir.
Thank you, Nick. I'm the Headless Giant. You can find me on YouTube. And if you have an interesting occult/paranormal/weird dream story that you want to send me, you can send it to headlessgiantpodcast@gmail.com, and I will read those, and me and Nick will analyze them.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yes, please keep sending those emails in, and check out that show if you haven't. Just for people who are listening. If you haven't listened to it yet, we also include like symbolism and glyphs at the beginning of the show. So it is actually informational, and I think it's really good. So check it out. And last but not least, Ethan Indigo. What is going on, my man? Thank you very much for making it. Please let everybody know what you're doing.
Yeah, honored to be here. I love the show, Headless, and always honored to be discussing anything with you guys. And this topic is something that's really, really outstanding. So I'm excited to hear what you got to say, Rye. And Ethan Indigo, I'm on all the social media. I write about the esoteric and the exoteric as well. So glad to be here. Thank you.
Yes. And he did put out a new piece of work, and it's on his own site and the Occult Research Institute. So go check it out. Thank you very much, Ethan. And finally, to the guest, to the man of the hour, next hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever it's going to be, we got Rye from Codega's Codex of Curiosities. It's great to have you on again, man. It's always a pleasure. Please let everybody know what you're doing.
Awesome, man. I appreciate that. It's fantastic to be back. Third time's a charm, I guess. Once on the Friday night and two on regular show. So, my show I host, Codega's Codex of Curiosities, and I interview guests from all walks and, researchers and experiencers of all high strangeness, whether it be ghosts, paranormal, UFOs, cryptids, glitch in the matrix, and researchers from historical lost paths, whether it be the Nephilim, the Book of Enoch, or the Anunnaki. It's all under my umbrella. That's about it. So, and I can be found exactly where you search the name title, Codega's Codex of Curiosities. You can find me on everything, TikTok, Insta, Facebook, Spotify, and YouTube. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And for new listeners, if you happen to have caught the Anne Rice vampire cult episode and you're into vampire cults, go check out the show that we did with Rye. We had a vampire. What was that? What was her name again?
Magdalena Solis.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Definitely check that one out. So, all right. Rye. We got time slip here. Yeah. What's the deal with it?
Yeah. Okay. So, I could do a show just on telling you about experiences of time slips and possibly time travel as well.
Save that for
Thursday.
Thursday.
They're almost one and the same, but I thought we'd dive deeper than that. Let's not just, scrape the surface. Let's go deeper. So first, what I want to do is I kind of want to give you guys a little bit of and for all who are listening, a little bit of a lesson on possible, like time itself. We're going to talk about time itself and, time as an illusion, and then my own analogy to maybe make it easier to understand what we're talking about. Okay. So that is where we're going to start, and then we're going to go from there. And then I'm going to jump into some scenarios of time slips, and I want you guys to, think about what maybe is it? Is it a time slip? Is it a glitch in the matrix? Or what exactly. So, first of all, I'm going to start off with is time as an illusion. Do time slips reveal the true nature of reality? And so many physicists and philosophers have argued that time really isn't linear as many of us believe it to be, not from like here in the past and we keep going on in a straight line, but it's more an emergent property of our consciousness. Now, that sounds confusing, right? So what that means is that it might be something that our consciousness actually creates, like a way our brain organizes events to make sense of them. So imagine all the moments, past, present, and future, they all are existing at the same time, like pages in a book. Okay, so your brain just reads one page at a time. We can't read every single page instantly. We have to read one at a time. And so it feels like time is moving forward. So when they say time is an emergent property of consciousness, they mean time might only exist because we're here to experience it. Without us, it's just one big cosmic now. So without consciousness, everything could be happening all at once. Okay, does that make sense? Like we are.
I saw a movie about this.
Yeah, I was gonna say that does remind me of a movie, and two different movies.
Everything all at once or something like that.
Even OA, I think, is a lot like that in a sense.
So our consciousness
had the Chinaman from Goonies, the Chinaman kid, Deja.
Exactly. And he was also in Loki as well, and that was all about time travel. That was all about time travel as well. Yeah.
Yep. Old Short Round's made quite a comeback. It seems like.
I believe so. I think so. I think he's going to be like your next hot thing right now.
Nice.
So if this is true, then time slips themselves might occur when a person momentarily just steps out of their usual perception of time and taps into a different temporal layer. And what I'm going to get into now is possible theories. Three. I'm going to bring up three possible theories about time. So first, there's the block universe theory. Have anybody have heard of that?
No, actually, I haven't.
Okay, so that's Einstein, okay, and Minkowski's idea as well, which is past, present, and future all exist simultaneously, like frames in a reel. Okay, so think of a movie reel. So time slips might be moments when someone just skips to a different frame. They kind of jump ahead. Okay, now next, and I'm going to go into these much deeper, but I'm just going to start with just tell you about them. So next is Julian Barber's timeless physics, and he suggests that time doesn't flow, only different nows exist. And you're like, well, isn't this kind of similar to what I just said? No. So what it is well, I'm going to get, like I said, I'm going to get into that. So a time slip could be a glitch when someone perceives another now instead of their usual one. And didn't I just say that? Kind of. But like I said, I'm going to get into that a little further. And then the third one, of course, is our simulation hypothesis. So if we live in a simulation, we live in the matrix. So if we live in a simulation, time could be programmed. It could be a program construct. Like time slips may happen when something disrupts or rewrites the code of the simulation, allowing us to access another moment, right? Now, if time is an illusion, like I was saying, then we just perceive these jumps in time are just possibly shifts in awareness between existing moments. So the person isn't necessarily traveling through time, but merely perceiving a different section of the film reel, okay, or simulation, or like a photo, okay? So now let's go into so time feels real to us because we experience events in a past, present, future sequence. That is how we perceive it. But many believe that it's just, the reason why we do that is because it's just a limitation of our perception. And so I'm going to go a little bit further now into the block theory. So the block theory, again, I said was like a film. And so the past, present, and future all exist like frames in a reel. Now, it was also expanded. So that was, the block theory was Einstein, but Herman Minkowski expanded on it and said there's no really special now. The present is just a perspective, and how we see it is not an objective moment. Okay, and like I said, if a time is fixed structure like it is in a row like this, time slips might occur when something shifts a person's awareness to another frame. So shifting awareness could possibly be a meditation of sorts, like you could be meditating and getting higher consciousness, or it could be a severe type of accident or incident where you jump forward or you jump backwards. And this lends credence to when people talk about glitches in the matrix, when some people have had a like almost an accident where they're going to get into an accident, and they swore they got into the accident, and next thing they know, they're driving the car. They might be in the past, or they might be forward in time, and they've just averted it because their consciousness has done something to jump them ahead or back. And when this happens many times, is that they're not fully in sync with the world around them. They're slightly out of sync. Okay. And when that happens, it takes them a little bit to regain back into that frequency. And I'm going to get into that a little bit later as well. So
now, is this a little bit like the video game concept of FPS, frames per second? Because what they do is that when you're looking at the video game, you get 60 frames per second. That's how the character moves from one frame to the other. So it's more like that model.
So no, that model actually is more like Julian Barber's timeless physics. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'll jump to that right away. But that frames per second is probably identical to Julian Barber's timeless physics. Okay, so I'm just going to finish off this one where now with this well, you know what? Let's just go to it. Let's go to it. So we got Julian Barber's timeless physics. So there's no time, only nows. And what does that mean is time doesn't flow. You know, like I said, it's an illusion created by memory and perception. So what we think of past and future are just different configurations of the universe. So what does that mean? So what that means is that every moment is a self-contained now. Like think of it like a picture, okay? That the best way to explain this is you have all these pictures in a photo album, okay? And each photo exists independently, okay? So think of your frames per second. Each photo exists independently. The movement from one to another is an illusion that we're imposing this movement, okay? So we're kind of connecting that. So let's say we get the frames per second extended out. Maybe it's like 1 frame per second, okay? So there's a little bit of gap in there. And our consciousness connects that because we impose this on it. We assume that time moves forward. So each event is independent, and our consciousness builds a bridge of sorts connecting these events. Okay? So these events could be exactly like he's saying, but we are just bridging them. And it could be so minute that we're not seeing the gaps, but our consciousness fills that in. Does that make sense? Now, and I wanted to touch on something. What I was talking about previously is that my theory on the block, when I was talking about the block universe, is my own personal theory is that we have an anchor. We have an anchor to this moment that we're stuck in right now, which is our consciousness is anchored, you know, be it by a frequency or like a silver cord. So perhaps that if we bump off of the time that we're on right now, let's say we have a time slip, we move into the past, okay? Think of it like a bungee cord. It's going to bring us back. It's going to bring you back. That's why people have these experiences and then they return back, because we're always coming back. We're tuned into that frequency that we're aligned with possibly when we were born. So that frequency is aligned at that moment. Maybe that moment of conception that we are given that frequency, and this is what we're always going to be on. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't jump realities left or right, but it's saying that time, let's say forward or backwards, that we would perceive as we're always going to keep coming back into the exact same point that we're in. Okay.
So instead of frames per second, you're talking about sort of like self-contained nows.
Yes, that's exactly it. That's a great way to say it. Self-contained nows. And it's like this one and this one. And our consciousness it bridges those gaps.
The rubber band between the two.
Exactly. Because if we try to have like the seamless memory, like go back 2 years, you try to have the seamless memory, you can't really have that. You're like, well, I remember this event and I remember kind of what I did in that event. And then what? Oh, then I remember that night I did this. And then I remember the next day I did this. It's kind of, and we could say, well, it's just our memory we can't remember. Is it? Or is it that we actually, during the exact moment, we're kind of, our consciousness is piecing that together. And then when we look back, we don't have those pieces there anymore. Our consciousness doesn't have to put those false bridges in anymore. And we only remember those self-contained memories.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thought. I like it for sure.
All right,
we definitely don't understand time, right? As much as science claims to understand. Right?
Yeah, you are completely correct on that one.
Yeah. Well said.
Now, and so how would this? So if we're talking about these self-contained things, how would that explain time slips? So if all moments exist independently, a time slip could happen when perhaps you accidentally switch from one picture to another, but instead of progressing through their normal sequence, you kind of jump ahead on a frame, or you fall backwards, or maybe someone else's photo album. Maybe it's not your photo album, maybe it's someone else's. So, which could also explain reports of people seeing historic events play out as if it was happening again in real time, and they can see like these. And it's not necessarily ghostly things happening, but it actually looks real. And I'm going to bring up one of those ones, definitely. So they're simply observing another now that exists parallel to their own, just this other photo album that they're looking through, not their own photo album. And then all of a sudden they snap back. And I always believe our consciousness frequency is what brings us back every single time.
Yeah, that's interesting. It sounds like when you're explaining that to me, it sounds a lot like some ideas of the undiscovered natures of quantum entanglement.
And I was going to bring up quantum entanglement because I think it's very important, but I will go into a little bit because the double slit experiment really kind of proves that there's other things are existing at the same time. So
right.
And I will definitely get into that. So next, we're going to go into the simulation hypothesis, which is what if we're living in this, that some higher beings have some advanced civilization. I think it was Nick Bostrom proposed the simulation theory where he suggests that a more advanced civilization may have created this detailed, immersive simulation where time is an artificial construct, right? And some people get very upset when you talk about simulation or matrix. They're like, I know, but this is as real as it's going to be for us, no matter what. Even if it is a simulation, anything is just like what we're perceiving. We're perceiving light and we're inputting it, we're seeing it through our eyes, and our eyes are converting it into a message into our brain. So what happens if we are a simulation, or what happens if it's real? It's exact. We're still perceiving the same thing. Okay. So people get upset. It's okay. Can we still have a creator? Can it literally be God? Yes. Why not? Why not could have God created a simulation? It'd be a lot easier to take care of than an actual planet. It might be easier than he just programs his son to come in, and his son takes over and comes in. Why not? It really can happen. It doesn't change the fact that any of these events didn't happen. They did happen. So time slips might occur in this type of scenario if perhaps if the system renders the wrong version of reality. And I don't know if any of you have seen the movie. It was like a B movie on Amazon Prime, and it was called the Mandela Effect. And they talk about the world is run by like quantum computers, and if you don't, let's say you don't enter that building across the street, it's not rendered inside because they're trying to save data. And there's very few of us who are actually the real beings that it would render this for us. So it's an interesting thought that we are living in a simulation, and that quantum computing is what is actually creating this. So that's one thing.
One thing about that,
yeah.
the idea in that movie, the Mandela Effect, was
Yeah.
that there was this quantum computer that was operating on not only this reality but multiple realities. So with
Yes.
the
Right.
idea of the simulation theory, it almost implies a multiple reality existence.
A multi-universe. Yes. Yep. And that was a fantastic movie. I think that was a movie that everybody should watch. I think it was really, really well done. I thought it was interesting. And it brings up a dream that maybe we should talk on Headless Giant. A dream that I had that 2 weeks before watching this movie, I had a dream that, you know, when he shuts down the quantum computer and everything kind of goes like blank and dead. I had the exact dream of that happening. And then 2 weeks later, I watched this. Or was it even 2 weeks later? I don't know. But then I watched this movie and it happens. And it was the scariest dream one of the scariest dreams I've ever had in my life. Like, it was so real. It was as if like the simulation was shutting down. It was rebooting, and that was it. It was terrifying, but that's all for another time. Yeah. So another issue for these time slips in the simulation could be a person's consciousness, maybe momentarily accesses a different save state of the simulation. So maybe there was a past save that we kind of jump into. Somehow we landed into that and we can see that, or maybe there's a glitch or an error in the processing of time data. So that could be a possibility. So now, time slips could also happen when the simulation maybe accidentally loads a different historical period and causing the person to actually see it. You know, when people go to Gettysburg, sometimes they see these reenactments and they're like, what is going on? Or they see these other soldiers coming up dressed from another time. It could be that this group of soldiers were loaded into this time period. And it also could be intentional. Okay, so a person, if we're talking the simulation, maybe someone is able to access, we'll say, like developer tools, or they're allowed to replay different moments of the past, like a God mode, so to speak. Who knows?
That sucks.
I'm just throwing these ideas out there. So,
Well, there seems to be this idea that there's a different form of energy that is taking place on the level of time that's different from gravity, that's different from these other physical forces that maybe is playing in the background.
yeah.
And so it's like when you're accessing the background information, and I think information is very key here, because what we're talking about is this information theory as it relates to time. And when that other information is accessed, that's when you sort of start to play the loop again. And so it's sort of like maybe not all information is there to render that image, so you get sort of an outline, or you get sort of like this spectral phenomenon.
And that could also play into like some places have like natural weak points. So I would say where there's like bleeding. I think that's kind of what you're like, some of the stuff bleeds over. So and we go into time being an illusion again. That might be exactly what we're seeing is these weak points within certain areas, like these. Possibly in these crossovers of these ley lines or these telluric currents or something along that line. So I think that's quite a realistic. I think it's just realistic that it could happen that way.
You know,
Well, if you were to overlay all of these different models on top of each other,
Yeah.
that's when you actually get closer to the truth. But it's very hard to picture that.
It's extremely hard to picture it. And that's a great segue into what I'm going to be talking about kind of coming up. So I made an analogy. This is my own personal analogy, my own personal take, because I'm like, a lot of this is difficult to take in. You're like, okay, that sounds interesting. But what's a way to look at it that maybe we'll all understand? And hopefully the younger generation will understand this. As for us, older generation, I'm going into, well, maybe the younger generation with vinyl records. Okay. So everybody remembers LPs, right? Now, that is what I'm going to do this through. So vinyl, I call this my vinyl record analogy, and skipping through time could be more akin to, in this context, to like block theory. So imagine time is a vinyl record. Okay. And you have it on the record player. and your consciousness is the needle on the record player. Okay, you started out, it's your birth. So the entire album, and let me finish this before, because at first it kind of like takes you off guard a bit. So the entire album, past, present, and future, is already etched out. It's already there, laid out for you. It's all in the grooves. It exists all at once. And our needle, our consciousness, just plays through the grooves in a sequential order, which is creating this illusion of flowing time. All the grooves, which, all the grooves as well could be more of like frequencies or time periods that already exist. And we just move through them in a set sequence unless something disrupts the flow. Okay. And some people will not like that theory because they're like, well, I have free choice. Yeah, we do. But to an extent, I believe, to an extent. So now let's say someone shakes the record player, a sudden shift in consciousness, so to speak, an environmental trigger, perhaps electromagnetic fields, or even a physical anomaly. The needle might skip to a different groove, and that can explain time slips. Okay, a momentary shift where a person finally finds themselves in a different area, or it could be a deja vu where the needle skips and replays the same groove, making it feel like, when you're like, I've experienced this before, and so it could be that you were ahead, but now you skip back one slot and now you're kind of catching up again. Now, it also could be premonitions. While people have premonitions, if the needle momentarily jumps forward and then comes right back, you might have a glimpse of the future, maybe an idea of what's going to happen. So now an example would be, someone's walking down a street and they suddenly find themselves in a version of the same place from 50, 60 years ago. And it could be the record needle might have just briefly skipped to an earlier part of a song, and then it just returns back. When I talked about that frequency, that elastic, bringing us back into the time that we're supposed to be. Now, also, when we talked about some of these bleeding over, it could be some of these places might be worn out, like a section of the record, when it would kind of skip a little bit, where the grooves are damaged or altered. There's higher incidences of time anomalies, and which could also be caused by local fluctuations in gravity or magnetism. It could be any of that. So certain places like that have electromagnetic hotspots, like Sedona, Skinwalker Ranch is a big one that has electromagnetic hotspots.
Makes sense.
So these places have high frequency magnetic anomalies. So that these locations do coincide with reports of, time distortions, apparitions like ghosts or glimpses of past events, and a lot of times they have lost time experiences. So that could play into this worn out section of the record. Now, also we have...
I was just actually investigating an area that seems to be in that same sort of groove. So I was listening to this one podcast called Sasquatch Chronicles, and this guy was talking about his ghost experience at a place called Columbia Mansion. Now, this Columbia Mansion has been destroyed for decades and decades, but him and his friends went out to this place, and they were looking for Columbia Mansion and the baby grave. I didn't find the mansion, but I found the grave of this baby where they heard this screaming from. Now, he said that when they first showed up at this place, they saw this huge wrought iron gate, and they could just barely slip through it. And they went up to the lady who was living there, and they started asking her questions like, how do we get out of this place? Because they were kind of lost. Now, she said, what's up with your clothing? And then they just noticed that she was holding a candle. She wasn't actually holding any sort of electric light. And they noticed that the lights on the outside of the gate, they were gas lights. And then they drove off. She was talking about some sort of carriageway or something. And she didn't know what a highway was. And so they drove off. They're looking around through these woods some more. And then as they drove back, they noticed that this Columbia Mansion was in complete ruins. And the fence was laying down on the ground. So it could have been a time slip like you were talking about. So
100%.
One of the reasons why I went out there.
That is cool. That is interesting. Now, because there will be a story that I talk about that has that type of that story type as well. And I'm going to get to that. So that is, I find those ones really interesting, where you're able to interact with people from the past. It's not just like this thing playing out, like we call like a residual haunting. Residual haunting just kind of repeats. It's like the records on skip. You know, there's one record, this other person's record is on skip, and it just keep playing over and over and over again, and you kind of see it. You see this ghostly apparition kind of going on. So that's interesting. And there is actually one specific one and another one that is slightly like that as well. So that could be, like you're saying, this electromagnetic hotspot, or gravitational distortions kind of play into that as well. So Einstein's general relativity states that strong gravitational fields can warp space-time. And we know that from, if anybody's ever watched Interstellar, we've all learned that. So there's also areas with underground mass concentrations like dense minerals or water flow. They have time dilation could occur, and such as large quartz deposits, which they have in Gettysburg. So that's something to consider as well. Now, so let's move ahead a little bit. So I'm going to say this. So, and like, okay, so in certain places, they have fluctuating magnetic or gravitational conditions. They might act like a scratch, like we're saying, or warp grooves in the records, causing people's perceptions to jump between these moments in time, exactly like you were saying, where they were interacting with someone else. So such as, like, you know, these haunted locations, if they have scratches in the fabric of time, the needle might frequently slip into these past grooves. Maybe you pass through a specific area that is this right time, right place, and you're able to see these people or ghosts or hear echoes of past events. Now, time loops, like Groundhog Day of sorts, is kind of maybe like a deep scratch in the record that can cause the needle to stick on a loop, and that person will keep repeatedly experiencing the same event. Like, and that's when I was talking about these ghosts that are caught in, we call residual hauntings, where they just keep repeating the same thing over and over again. It just might be their residual energy, not the actual person, but it's that it happened so often and it was so ingrained in there that it just got stuck. That energy got stuck in there. Also places like the Bermuda Triangle is well known for time distortions. Could that be through gravitational, or could it be through like underground mass concentration of like dense minerals or quartz, of something like that? There's rumors that it could be that's what it could be. Okay, so now we're gonna go to quantum superposition. Okay, so the core idea of quantum superposition is the idea that particles like electrons or photons can exist in multiple states or locations at the same time, but only until they're observed. So they can exist in all these different locations, but once they're observed, they are measured, they collapse into one definite state. Okay, so that, if those of you don't know the double slit experiment, I'm sure many people know that, which is one of my favorite experiments ever, because it just really throws a wrench in everyday physics and just everyday relativity. So what they did was fire a single particle at two slits, okay? And it behaves like it's going through both slits. So this particle splits apart. It kind of like splits apart, goes through, so it's going through two locations, and it creates a wave-like interface pattern. So it was kind of doing this, that when it hit the wall behind it, it was showing up in this really weird formation. It shouldn't be doing that. And this is when people were not looking at it, okay? But the moment it was observed, the wave that it was going through just collapses and it picks just one slit. So there's no interference. So if you shot it through, if you're shooting at these two slits, you would think you'd have one line on the other side and one line on the other, but it wasn't. When they were shooting at these two slits and no one was watching, they were just doing this crazy, they're going through both slits, and then they were appearing on the other side in this abstract kind of a way, because they were interfering with each other as after they passed through. But they shouldn't do that. And when we observe them, so the observer creates reality, which is huge, which really takes us back to our consciousness. When I said in the beginning that everything is kind of just happening all at the same time, it really is, until our consciousness comes into play and we watch it. We give it reality. The observer creates reality. Okay.
Well, it brings up the topic of potential versus kinetic energy.
True.
Right? So that kinetic energy is something that's being expended, and that potential energy would be that waveform, which is that before it becomes that particle, after it's been observed. Again, they're dealing with photons, so you can see as it's going through those double slits, it makes this wide variety of markings based off of like waves in the ocean as it's going through. But once you use instruments to try and measure the photon as it's passing through there, it narrows down to 2 slits. So
Yes.
it's the potential versus the kinetic right there in that sort of example.
Exactly. And reality itself is kind of like I don't know, like a quantum smoothie where all possibilities exist, everything all at once right now, until you observe it or you measure it. And that's when it collapses into one version, which can open up so many other possibilities, such as, cryptids. Why can't we find cryptids? Well, they're not being observed, right? It's like, why, if you are there at the moment where you actually are watching, where one is passing through in another reality, perhaps, if you're there to observe it, that's why you see it. Or a UFO or shadow beings. They're kind of like perhaps in these overlapping realities, and it's only visible when our frequency or observation lines up with theirs. So is it spooky, or maybe it's quantum? I don't know. It's kind of a little bit of everything. So I've often said as well that, our realities are like the Russian nesting dolls. But I'm going to get into that a little bit right now, where we're kind of stacked on top of each other. Okay. So
I got a question for you, right? In regards to the double slit experiment there and the spooky nature of it. That is what Einstein called it, right? Spooky physics.
Yeah.
He would later agree with Niels Bohr before he would die, despite disagreeing with him prior to that. Niels Bohr being the physicist behind the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics. Because why do you think it is that modern day science folks shun this quote unquote interpretation?
Oh, are you asking me why do I think modern day?
Yeah. What? Because like I've had lengthy conversations with numerous science folks across various spectrums of philosophy to engineering and whatnot, et cetera. And they're all taught this is bullshit. You know what I mean?
Because why would you? Because if you were taught that it's real, then everything else you're basing your science on is kind of like shaky legs almost. You don't. But like they believe that,
right? But even the philosophers, right? Even the guys that are doing it in theory, right? They're even signing up for this program, right?
Yeah, it's if you say it doesn't exist, then you are over here, okay? And you're saying this is the only thing that exists. If you're saying yes, it does happen, but it exists because we watch. Like when we watch it, we create our reality. Well, I'm still saying that both can be true. So the sense is that I can observe this, and I can't observe this, and it's going to do something crazy. But as soon as I observe it, then it becomes real for us. Well, you can still base everything on that. You can still build on that. It's just it opens the doors for so many more ideas, that there's so much more out there, and it kind of takes us back to like I know we're talking about the Dark Ages earlier, where we're not allowed to question things. We're set in this way, we're set to know that the Egyptians built the pyramids to bury the kings in, and that was their tombs, and we can't look at anything else because that is what we've taught everybody. It's ego. One of the biggest things is egos. People can't step backwards and say, okay, yeah, that's not right, and we need to look at it differently. Oh, that's, even though 3 or 4 teachers taught me this, I've now understand that that's not right, and I need to step back, and I was one of those teachers, so I need to say, yeah, I was wrong. Many people the biggest thing is ego. People can't admit that they're wrong and continue with it, because if they admit that they're wrong, then fundamentally everything else that they've been teaching is quite possibly wrong as well.
Oh yeah.
But is it?
Oh, for sure. I agree with you for sure. I also think there was something more of, the lid kind of popped off in the situation, and someone made a call like we gotta put a stop to this back in 1932 or whatever, whenever the conference was. We got to put a stop to this because we can't put the toothpaste back in, into the tube. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And quite possibly there are people who know this, but they're not letting it out, right? Maybe they know something a little bit more, and they have an advantage because of this.
For sure.
If I may add on to that, I believe the exact term that Einstein used was spooky action at a distance. So it kind of implies the reason why they were, or even we were, averse to it, because it is so non-material, it's intangible, and yet it's an action. It's happening. I wanted to mention an Einstein quote too that really beckons to this whole idea of simulation and just the confounding nature of time and reality. He said, reality is an illusion, albeit a persistent one, which I think just really kind of encapsulates so much of this thought or so much of the ideas that you're sharing. And I wanted to share too, just for consideration, space and time are the only things, if they are things, if you will, that can't be destroyed, right? So that has this kind of interweaving quantum thing going on with space and time. I just wanted to remark on that.
For sure.
And energy as well, definitely.
Well, I think this goes into a lot of Nick's personal experience, because science as a discipline is all located in the somatosensory cortex of the brain, right? Which would be that strip that goes right across that middle cortex that you see depicted in those psychology classes as the sensory homunculus, right? So you have to have the ability to see, touch, taste, and smell it for it to be considered science. And they're using instruments and calibrating their instruments against their observations for them to be able to see it. Now, if you've shut off all of your senses, it takes you to a different place, which is what Nick has done crossing the abyss. He's shutting off all of the senses. And then once you've shut off all of the senses, then you're left with what's left. And that is something different than what we're used to dealing with in these hard sciences. And it's not something they're willing to look at. And so the entire institution of science is based off of that strip going across your head, and not the rest of the brain, which is still existing even when you've shut that off.
Well, like a great way to go do that is a sensory deprivation chamber.
Right.
Those are fantastic. I've done that. I've done that multiple times.
I definitely suggest those things.
Yes. Yeah. A friend of mine actually owned a business where they had all these chambers. So we would always go after hours and go in there. So that was cool.
You know, something else I wanted to bring up before, it was something that was probably stuck in my head for 10 minutes. I was like, I can't forget to say this. Neil deGrasse, whatever, that Tyson dude, whatever.
Oh, Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah, he did say this, and I was like, God damn, this is the only thing I think I ever heard him say that was worth listening to. He was going on about like the whole Matrix idea, which I do think is quite possible. And he says maybe the reason we can't go past the speed of light is because then we'll be going past the speed of the program writing the Matrix, and that's impossible. And I was like, motherfucker, man. I was like, yo, he said something kind of like worth listening to.
Well, I do believe he is a little smart. I do believe that. But I believe that
I think he's a paid actor, though. I think he's smart.
100%. Yes. Yeah, I think he's a shill, but I do believe that he does come up with some good stuff.
Yeah. When I heard him say that, I was like, ooh, that's interesting to think about.
I wonder what you think about maybe a contrast to the simulation potential of a reality that's impacted by simulations or I mean, I think, and that's, this whole idea, it's kind of too scary or too spooky to contemplate. As for, the vortexes and these spots of power and where space and time seem to intersect or something, but maybe there's forces that didn't create a simulation but are impacting reality in some way? I know it's a crazy question.
Like, how is it? How are these certain locations like more powerful than others, or like these crossover points? Is that what you mean?
I mean more like in the sense where if there was a superior being that created a simulation, being one possibility, what about the possibility that there's some kind of other superior beings that are impacting reality in a sense? So it's kind of like the simulation, but a little not in totality.
Like people who've got cheat codes and they're kind of coming in, these other, not the actual developer, but maybe other players who've come in with cheat codes and they're able to override that 100%. That's like, if we want to go into simulation theory, I still believe everything else existed, such as like the Fallen and whatnot, the Watchers. Those would be those types of people who have come down with these extra abilities, these cheat codes, or so to speak, and
even those stories we have of the Watchers are really just kind of ancient alien and cargo cult tales of trying to describe some activity.
Yeah, because they didn't know how to describe it, so you describe it through magic. But magic and science technically are pretty damn close. We just separated it in the past like couple hundred years.
For sure.
Yes. And so when we're also talking about this being a matrix, and some people are kind of, you really should look up, I think it's is it Danny Goller who talks about the who used DMT and lasers to actually see code? I don't know. Have you guys?
I saw that. That is fascinating, and it keeps on being, from what I see anyway, online. It keeps on being repeated, and by people who are as equally astonished.
By like hundreds now. It's not just, and some people are led in not knowing what they're going to see. So it's kind of like I don't want to say a blind experiment, but here you go. We're not going to lead you on and know what you're going to expect. And a lot of them have described this running code, and that there is this code of sorts. Exactly. It's pretty interesting. And the gentleman there, he actually talks about, he was able to see the matrix. He was able to see things being designed and built accordingly. And things changed as well, like streets being changed instantaneously. And he says it was like he thought he was prepared for that, but he said even after he saw that, it was extremely shocking as well. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the movie, and I love relating things to movies. So I think there's a lot of, some of it is soft disclosure, some of it is just people are tapping in and they don't really, they're writing these movies or these books. It's because they have access. They don't know, they have subconscious access to what is really going on. So such as the movie called Dark City, where they're able to, they call it cubing. I believe it's called cubing, where they're able to change the city outlook and the way the cities are. And then they change memories of people. And it's really, really interesting.
Well, they called it tuning. But
yeah, it was tuning, but it was also, I thought it was cubing, but yes, they're able to cube. I think they're able to cube, but it's tuning. Yes. Yeah.
Right. And I think there's a real big crossover between this idea of the Archons, the Watchers, Dark City, the idea that there are these things existing outside of phase, right? Yeah. So as we phase through those different layers, as they describe, they would be existing outside of those layers looking in. And I think Nick's experience, where he's like slowing down these sort of film reels in his personal experience, is sort of like, hey, maybe what if I just step back outside of this thing and I don't use my senses, I use my mind instead of all these other things that are interacting with me.
Yeah, I think you almost like choose like a different senses to entertain instead.
It reminds me, the complexity of all this reminds me of something I believe Steiner proposed, that on each planet there were several different dimensions of beings and life, and we could only see one on each planet type of thing, which is just, it's outstanding to consider, but it just kind of relates to all this potential.
I like those ideas, Ethan, because our senses, especially our sense of what we can see in the visible light spectrum, is pretty terrible.
Oh, yeah.
It's less than 1%. It's less than 1% of what we can actually see, and perhaps we're designed like that because if we could actually see everything, we would go bananas. We go bonkers.
It implies
for sure.
It implies that there's somebody keeping the drums, keeping the beat. And that's what everybody's on, is keeping that beat. But what if you just go outside of that beat and then you could see the system for what it really is?
Sometimes I wonder if that's what that movie Birdcage was kind of about. Remember how those people were going crazy when they were seeing that? It was like almost like they'd see these jinn or something coming, or these demons, and they'd go nuts and either kill themselves or kill others. I was like, what if people actually were able to start seeing more with their eyes, what's in existence, and they didn't know what was going on? Could people start freaking out?
They would probably become a non-communicating autist. They'd be stunned, just like as that. What was it, Headless? What is it called?
The telepathy tapes.
Thank you.
I've heard about those. I haven't gotten into them yet.
Well, it's the same idea. They don't have control over their sensory strip, right? And so when they're finally able to communicate using this typing method, they're not associating with their body at all, right? And so they've got a different experience that allows them to sort of connect on a different level that now other people are like, no, you're in your body. And they don't even realize that the arms that are flailing around and that the incidents that are happening are actually associated to them at all.
It's fascinating. So there's like this disassociation between mental or consciousness and physical.
And the body, yeah.
I believe one of the youngsters in the telepathy tapes, as he's developing and getting older, he would come home from his classes or school, and he was, still having problems, but becoming more in tune with himself. But he would cover himself in pillows so that he could turn off, and that's where he could connect. That and I think he actually that he literally said himself was that that's where I could turn off and go into this other dimension, if you will, of this psychic place.
Wow, that is.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the telepathy tapes. I mean, I'm vaguely familiar with it, but I figure I'll wait for season 2 when they take the kids to Vegas to count blackjack with some cash.
Now, do you guys mind if I keep going? I'm almost done.
Yeah.
I'm almost done my scientific kind of analogy. So back to the record, right? So I was saying everything is like record. So I want to go into now. I said that our groove, our past, our present, our future is already predetermined. But I want to bring into the many worlds theory, which Hugh Everett III brought in, right? So which means that every decision that we make creates a branching alternate reality, every single decision. So my decision to come on today, maybe I had another decision where I declined and I go a different route. So that's a whole new other reality. So like what it is like a new record in a massive collection. So all these records are stacked upon each other, and your needle, your consciousness is just on the one. There could be an event though where the needle jumps to another record, or that's stacked above it or below the existing one, which could start to explain a little bit of alternate timelines or Mandela effects. Now you could possibly have two records that have grooves or frequencies that are nearly identical, and this is more along the lines of like your Mandela effect, where just a small skip, you might skip from one to the other. So maybe you do make a choice, and we're going to jump to that other record, but that's that big choice, that skip though, there might be some minor reality shifts. Maybe like a word in a famous quote is different, or a product logo you guys remember is differently. So I just believe that these are just these multiple records that are all there. They're all there. And our frequency, we're still at that one point in our frequency, which is, we call that our time, our now. And we could jump to a different reality, but we're still going to be in that now. and maybe we're going to jump backwards a little bit, but we're always going to be brought back to our now through that silver cord or our consciousness, that rubber band or that bungee cord is going to bring us back. Now, what else could there be? So so there could be like a momentary shift in consciousness that could result in some briefly experiencing reality where history played out a slightly different. Now, I know you were talking about earlier, I can't remember, Nick, if you were saying about time dilation and maybe altered perception. And the way I would explain that is like a record could be played. And again, I'm just going back to records. Records can be played at different speeds, like 33 1/3, 45, or 78 RPM, which affects how we perceive the audio or experiencing the event. So it could be slower or faster, and that we relate to quite possibly how quite possibly our consciousness or physics could affect how time is perceived, which would take us into like relativity and time dilation, where Einstein's special relativity says that time slows down when we're approaching high speeds or, like I said, strong gravitational fields, such as like and I've talked about this before. So astronauts maybe on the ISS, they do age slightly slower than people on Earth due to this effect. And that's a whole other topic if we want to talk if space is real and whatnot, but that's a whole other episode. But
well, time definitely dilates on Earth here too, though, because anyone who's had their adrenaline pumping will realize that's
exactly what I was going to say. So it could be the brain processes sensory inputs at different speeds depending on stress, drugs, or altered states. So adrenaline surges, like you're saying, so such as during an accident, when that can increase the frame rate or perception, meaning that time slows. So many times when people have near-death experiences or NDEs, many people report that the time slows down, and during these life-threatening moments, they could be like slowing the record speed. How they say, "I saw my life flash before me," or they're making a second feel like an eternity when everything's just going so slow. Exactly. So it's definitely this adrenaline or this the stress can do that. Now, also psychedelics. And it can affect our time perception. So DMT or mushrooms can affect our default mode network, or which is the DMN of the brain, causing either the time loops, a needle to be stuck in a groove, or expanding time perception of hours, of like minutes into hours. So we could just be. Yeah. So
what are your thoughts on the natural production of DMT? If I may interject there, Rye.
Well, I believe that we need that to keep us in sync with our frequency right now. I think it kind of helps us keep our time flow to a natural point, right? I think it allows us to actually be able to. It allows us, if we can fully access the DMT that we have that's naturally produced. Like I know we produce it, but I don't think we fully take advantage of it. I think that. I can't disagree with you on that one, sir. That sounds about what I'm thinking. I wonder if it's often the driving force behind this whole experience of time that you're describing. Yeah, I feel though that us as humans have been, and I'm not sure if I mentioned this on the show before, have been governed. I think that we used to have a lot more abilities, and we're kind of like how you put a governor in a car so they can't exceed a certain speed. I believe that humans in general have been governed, whether we've been governed by a creator, whether we've been governed by like this ruling class, or maybe all the above, is to limit our ability or our knowledge or our wisdom or anything. I feel that we are, and the DMT, I believe that we naturally create. I think maybe there are certain people who can access it better, such as like certain shamans, when they go into a meditative state, a drumming meditation, they're able to access the upper and lower worlds. I know some of them use drugs as well. Not all of them use drugs though. And maybe perhaps that they're able to access that natural stream of DMT.
Well, if I could slightly modify your analogy, what if we're building the master instead of just playing a record? So each record has to go through the process of having these grooves cut into it. And so as we're going around that track, we're actually cutting the grooves, and we're actually making those songs around that thing as it's being perceived. Well, you have to wonder if people are on a different beat, a different time scale, those are going to be different grooves cut into that record. And so if that's the case, then you could say culture is really driving the different perceptions of time scales that are being cut into those grooves as we're living our lives through this sort of plane of reality. And
Sure.
when you've separated yourself from that sensory perception, you're sort of picking up that needle. And so now you're perceiving a whole different reality.
Well, that's a good point.
Right? And then let's say you're just taking that needle and you're just throwing it across the room and you're going.
Well, that's dangerous, friend. Don't do that.
You know, but I mean, that's one of the issues that's going on. Maybe that's what death is. We're just picking off our needle and throwing it to a different record, you know?
What's fueling all these operations you're describing with these needles and the spinning and the grooves and the production?
I think the spinning is a big part of it too, because a lot of what we perceive and a lot of what we feel comes down to torsion physics, you know, and the torsion physics we see produced all around us naturally, like what causes a tornado to spin. You know, these are ideas of pressure differential and how these things interact geometrically. Right. That really have the basis for why these things are acting the way they are. But when I've heard so many different people who have near-death experiences that see a tornado above people's heads after they leave sort of the planet. They're like, all these different tornadoes are taking place. Well, what's going on with that? I think there's some kind of torsion physics that's allowing humans to interact on this reality that we haven't really covered the geometry of.
Well, that's probably true.
Thinking about that.
That's probably true in seeing all these geometric shapes and whatnot. But again, back to what's fueling that experience, I think it's the same thing that's fueling our experience in relative to time, and what I think largely fuels our dream state is the natural production of DMT. Well,
again, like all
basically
these different molecules,
we're all tripping basically throughout all this.
We're all tripping balls, especially when we.
That's why you're seeing all those hexagonal shapes and these tornadoes and stuff, and during these near-death experiences or these recycling of all your life cycle of moments and whatnot, and this picture format as Rise described here. All of these things I think are fueled by that DMT experience that we don't quite understand of natural production of it, but yeah, it is basically a trip, right? You're basically hallucinating.
There are these dead giveaways when you're in a dream and when you're outside of a dream, right? One of them is that numbers don't seem to work the same way in dreams that they do in our waking reality. So when you're looking at a clock in a dream, it's just not giving you the same kind of information. When you're trying to read something, it's not giving you the same information in the dream. So I think there's like this offset that comes with different molecules and different things that sort of skip a little bit. Now we spend, a third of our lives asleep. So what's happening there in terms of the relationship with the body and consciousness hasn't really fully been explained, but I think there's a geometric component to it that causes that sort of offset to occur.
Oh, for sure. Well, you're right. It hasn't been effectively explained. And there was a guy circa about 100 years ago. I really like his theory. He wrote a pamphlet for you like circa they're headless. He wrote a pamphlet. He was a British aeronautical engineer named J.W. Dunn. He wrote a small pamphlet called an experiment in time. And he basically, based upon his own experiences and journals, he was theorizing that, when we're in our dream state, he didn't know anything about DMT, but when we're in our dream state, that our conscious self works not in this linear space and time as we were mentioning earlier, but more so in the concept of, as you were describing, Rye, everything is right now. Our consciousness can access everything. We just perceive these things linearly as we're awake. Yes. So in that regard, he started unpacking his dream state and things he was seeing in there, and realizing that he's not predicting the future in these premonitions. He's just his consciousness can remember the future because it's already existed in his dream state.
Yeah, that's something I thought of as well. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ethan.
Oh, thank you. Right. I was going to say, as far as the experience of deja vu, What if it is like that, in the sense that, right, scientifically it takes a fraction of time, but it takes a bit of time for the light to come into our eyes and be digested and understood by the mind. What if our consciousness is also distinct from this playing of the time-space record player, and every once in a while, deja vu is when we're actually more present, when we're actually the only time we might be present, and the rest of the time we're observing what is already played out via some fraction of time or elongated time between our experiencer and our consciousness. And I believe scientists point out that kids up until we're 8 is basically like a light acid trip with the chemicals that we're on.
Yeah.
So
I'll take a couple doses of that, please, Ethan.
Give me my childhood back.
Yeah. So there's a guy that's actually written about a lot of these ideas, just as you described deja vu, Ethan. There's a fellow that's trying to put the science behind this stuff in some books named Anthony Peake. He describes, you familiar with some of his work? Anthony Peake, no? He describes, I'm not a biologist, I'm also not the vice president, but he describes this whole process of microtubules in the brain and light and all sorts of stuff that I don't understand, but he makes it sound real nice. But I like a lot of his ideas, in philosophy speaking, is relative to, to time. And he's read a couple books on that, and then a couple books on dream state stuff, and, a couple books on, he's got a general thesis of, that we've all done this before. And whether, you're just reliving the past over and over again, Groundhog Day style, as you mentioned, Rye. In fact, the screenwriter for Groundhog Day read this dude's book and absolutely loved it, apparently. So.
Fantastic. Okay, I got one. I'm just going to finish this off, and then we're going to move on to my time slip story. So I'm going to finish this off here. So what it is I was going to say this. So yeah. So again, I was talking about the speeding up and slowing. So we said that like during any type of major event, such as a car crash, it's just a record of slowing down. Now, after all that's all done, I'm going to move into the consciousness. So as I mentioned before, and this is going to wrap everything up, is that what holds us in the place of space and time, which is, let's say, the arm of the record player, which is the consciousness, which is the key to time perception. This is our anchor. Okay. And I know we mentioned anchor much earlier, so I'm going to mention anchor, but this consciousness is our anchor. So in a record player, there's the arm that holds the needle in place, and this could represent our perception and awareness. And if we could learn how to control the arm, we might be able to move the needle intentionally, which is like conscious time travel. So you lift the needle, observe all of time at once, which could be people as a higher state of consciousness. Which could be, like monks practicing meditation. Now, you also adjust the weight of the arm to make the needle less prone to accidental skips, which could be mental and environmental stability. So where you're more in tune with everything and you're not going to have these jumps in and out, it could be, you working on that. So like, mystic monks and practitioners of altered state, like those in the CIA's gateway process, claim to have seen past and future events, which could be like lifting the needle up, like I said, to view the entire record instead of just being stuck in the one groove. And just to touch on it, so the gateway process, which was declassified in '83, that was focused on training to get our consciousness to move beyond time and space. So as we know it, the brain is more or less naturally limited to playing that one groove at a time. But quite possibly with the right techniques, we could lift the needle up and explore all of time freely. So the Monroe Institute worked with the CIA to explore consciousness expansion techniques, teaching individuals to detach from awareness from time and space. They used binaural beats and altered states, suggesting that the mind, we could literally lift the needle and perceive all the time at once. So
that'd be a lot of perception.
yes, yeah, exactly. So that is pretty much my final thoughts would be the record player model of time that aligns with modern physics, neurology, and quantum mechanics. So if consciousness plays a role in time perception, then intentional techniques or external forces such as electromagnetism, gravity, altered states could momentarily shift our needle, leading to real experiences of the past or future. So it's quite possibly that we'd be able to tune our frequency to shift backwards or forwards. And it's much more common. It seems it's much more easier to shift backwards. So like you're saying, like we're cutting our new record, we're cutting that prime record. Maybe it is because the future doesn't exist. Maybe because everybody talks about these backward shifting kind of thing. We're able to move or slip into the past. Maybe there's a possibility that we literally only have now in the past, but I do believe that future exists as well.
It's that wave. There's a wave going on in the future, and I think you can influence that wave a lot easier than people perceive it to be. And we've sort of been, stuck in the idea that everything is inevitable, but it's still a wave. It's just potential.
I agree. Now, all right. So we want to, we can go into, I got 5 cases to talk about.
Okay.
Shouldn't take as long. Shouldn't take an hour. Should be about 40 minutes, I would say. But it depends on how much we talk. So.
All right, go for it.
So you let me know when we're starting.
Let's go. We're good.
Oh. Right on. Okay. So now after we've done all that, I'm going to jump into some time slips.
Time slipping?
Yeah, we're time slipping, man. We're
taking a time slip.
Yep. And so I'm going to talk about 5 here, and we're going to talk about the first one, which is the most infamous, one of my probably favorite, and there's so many possibilities to this, which is the Philadelphia experiment. Now, this is, I don't even know where to classify this really. So for those who don't know, Philadelphia experiment was probably the most notorious or alleged case of a time slip. So this happened during World War II. The U.S. Navy reportedly conducted an experiment in October of 1943, and it was aboard the USS Eldridge. Now, what they were attempting to do was to render the ship invisible to enemy radar. Now, according to the story, the experiment not only achieved radar invisibility, but it achieved invisibility right there in person, but also accidentally transported the ship and its crew through time. Okay, so this is all allegedly. And now witnesses claim that the ship disappeared from its dock in Philadelphia and reappeared minutes later in Norfolk, Virginia, which is over 200 miles away. So some reports suggest that the ship was briefly visible in the distant future as well, possibly glimpsing advanced technologies or unrecognizable world before returning back to 1943. So the consequences of this were horrific. So some of the sailors were said to be fused into the ship's hull. Some were driven insane by the experience or left disorientated and unable to function. So now, intriguingly, some former sailors have claimed to remember fragments of the experiment, and they're saying that there was these unnatural sensations and unexplainable shifts in their surroundings, which adds a chilling layer of credibility. Now, these accounts align with speculation that the experiment inadvertently unlocked a gateway to an alternate timeline or to the future. Now, in 1984, there was I know it's an older movie, but there was a movie called The Philadelphia Experiment, which dramatized the whole thing and introduced the idea of a government conspiracy to control time and space. And while the movie did embellish on certain elements, it did cement the story's place in popular culture, which, was it a glimpse into humanity's potential future, or was it a just a warning that these dangers of tampering with the fabric of reality. So that's what the movie kind of did. Now, what was thought was that this ship actually phased in and out, okay? And it was with a large amount of electricity, they were able to shift this ship into a wormhole. That is what potentially happened. And shifting in and out of reality, I believe the ship and the sailors were both shifting out of they were in different frequencies, different realities. And that is why some of the sailors actually fused into the boat, because they were slipping in and through. And when it returned back into the time that it should have been in 43, they both materialized, and some were partly inside the ship. So that is the Philadelphia experiment. Now, what do you guys have any like theories on the Philadelphia experiment? What do you guys think? I know Einstein and Tesla were both involved with this. To what extent, I'm not 100% sure. That's something I need to look further into, but I believe that they both played a part in this experiment.
So if we're gonna summarize the technology used,
yes,
I think it's important to note that Tesla was somehow involved in this process, and he had two inventions that would probably come into play, which would be his Tesla coil, right, which you can modulate the frequency to create actually different sounds coming from a Tesla coil based upon the frequencies that it emits. And also he had what they call the earthquake device, which was just a oscillating vibratory thing that would create a type of vibration that could be used as a resonator with the structure around it. So if you use the resonant frequency of this ship, right, which every object has a resonant frequency, and then you use a similar or some kind of a electromagnetically resonant frequency to that base resonance, then what you're going to do is you're going to create a phase distortion, because all of those molecules and all of the stuff on that ship is now going to be vibrating at a harmonic that can then be influenced. So you throw these things together and you don't know what you're doing, you might create invisibility based off of the fact that there are no more molecules there. They would shift out of phase. So if that was the goal of the experiment, I think it was a monumental failure, because you're not just making it invisible, you're making it no longer applicable to this sort of time perception.
It's true. Yeah. And Tesla was involved with the Navy with conducting experiments in electromagnetic field manipulation. So there's a high probability that he was involved with the Philadelphia experiment, because he was working with wireless energy, like you said, with his Tesla coils and scalar fields, and of course, resonant frequencies as well.
And to your point earlier about references to movies there, Rye, I believe Christopher Nolan kind of instilled these Tesla legends in his film, The Prestige, where he's using his technology to, transport objects, physical objects from one location to another.
I haven't seen that movie yet. Everybody's like, why haven't you seen that movie? My favorite
Christopher Nolan movie.
I gotta watch it. I have it. I haven't watched it, so I'm gonna make sure I make a note that I need to do that.
Yeah, especially if you're into Tesla stuff, because that's a big part of the whole plot line, like I just pointed out. And David Bowie plays Tesla. That's a bit odd, but I'm a big fan of the Tesla storyline and technology, and what we don't understand about it still today. And I used to go to Los Angeles a lot for business, and that's, I believe, the only functioning Tesla coil still available to public view.
To the public.
Yeah,
yes.
to public. Yeah, at Griffith Park there in Los Angeles.
I swear I didn't get this question from Q, but I wonder what was Trump's uncle or whatever the guy is from MIT. I wonder what he was doing.
John Trump.
And it also makes me think, I know it's silly, but that whole Baron time traveler book is awfully spooky. What do you think of that? Right?
Extremely spooky. Are the Trump's time travelers, or which very much could be, because his mentor, Baron Trump's mentor, was the Dawn, right? They called him the Dawn. So it's that is one book that I have not dove into. I know a little bit about it.
And he was from Madison Avenue, I believe.
Yes, he had a hotel on Madison Avenue. He lived on Madison Avenue, and that also led to The Last President as well. They wrote a book. He also wrote a book called The Last President, with Trump being the last president. So it's a lot of unrest, which goes down with it. So who knows? Now, I often think, is it a possibility he's a time traveler, or is it a possibility that he's really knowledgeable about things that are out there and uses that to his advantage? Like let's just say because this book has been around for, I don't know, since the 1800s or something like that. Maybe he saw it and he named his child after that book for that very reason. Is that a possibility? It could be. It could be that he is quite astute and aware of the going on, and
maybe they happened at the same time, though, right? The book was named and Baron was named. It happened at the same time.
It could be.
Yep.
Well, I do think there's a lot more to this John G. Trump situation. He was the most notable physics professor in MIT history, and he was deeply involved in black projects during World War II, not the least of which was getting his hands on Tesla technology. And again, the fact we have one Tesla coil for folks to go see should tell the story of we don't know shit about whatever Tesla was into.
Yeah, well, we're not allowed to know that kind of shit. So yeah, because allegedly when he went in to collect Tesla's boxes or crates, there was, I'm just saying, I can't remember the numbers, like 48 crates, and then he returned like 43 crates and said there's nothing of notable value in any of this. Like, so where's the rest of it?
It brings to mind the idea of what these people have called the jump rooms, right? And so what they talk about is the ability to see between these different timelines and to see back into the past based off of these, Tesla technologies that were taken. And then you look at the idea of this Trump phenomenon and how Baron Trump and all the rest of these characters are found in these books. And it's like, maybe they were looking into a slightly different potential future, or maybe other parts that they didn't necessarily get to put together. And so maybe authors were watching at this, jump room, watching these different futures play out, writing it down and making novels out of it. You never know, because once you've started this sort of process of inspecting potential futures, you could get some of these images and maybe not all of them.
Sure.
Well, isn't that what prophets are? We have prophets from, times of old, and now we don't have any more prophets. Is that possible? Or maybe we do, and they just write books about it.
Don't tell the Mormons that, sir. They got a prophet.
There we go. We got to talk about that, JJ. We got to talk about those Mormons.
All right.
Next one.
Yes.
All right. So the next one we're going to jump into, of course, is one that actually, this is a time slip area that is extremely common. So when we talked about those weak points, maybe like the record is worn down, it's in this spot. It's in Liverpool, England, on Bold Street. I don't know if you guys ever heard about Bold Street in Liverpool. It is known for these time slips happening so often. So this happened in 96. A man named Frank was out shopping with his wife. They parted their ways, and because you don't want to go shopping with your wife all the time. She goes to her stores and you're like, well, I'm going to go to check out a bookstore or something like that. So Frank was walking around and he said that he noticed like the atmosphere was starting to change around him. He said that the air seemed heavier and the noise of modern traffic kind of was like fading away. It was like he was walking through some sort of fog. So when he looked around, he realized that like this ain't 1990 anymore. And he says the cars were all older. They looked like the 50s, and the streets, he said, were much quieter. The shops around him had changed as well. So instead of like this modern bookstore that he was going into, he saw one called crypts, which he's able later to confirm on that one. And not the gang crypts, but CRIPPS. Yes. Let's clear that up. So Frank walked further, and he was feeling like I don't belong in this area or this time. So he inadvertently interacted with the shopkeeper, he said, who seemed entirely unaware of anything out of the ordinary, and which kind of further cemented this experience. It was just authentic. And he says, though, as soon as the experience started, it just kind of, he said he found himself, it just kind of like all faded and went back into the present. So his consciousness brought him back, his silver cord or his bungee cord brought him back into this time. He says he was driven by curiosity about this. So he started researching records and photographs from the 50s, and he was able to match everything up. He even like the exact location of that shop he went in, Crips, it was there. And so everything aligned with these historical archives. And so it really lent weight to his story. You know, a lot of people just have these anecdotal evidence, but he was able to, give these descriptions of the stores, and then he was able to find them as well. So it really looked like this type of temporal shift that he had. So this would definitely be a time slip. So like I said, this wasn't a isolated incident on Bold Street. A lot of people, they call this the temporal hotspots. So, but why is this a place where there's a lot of crossover? Is this a place where those grooves aren't as thick? Is it just this crossover of these times, this one specific point? Is there a high concentration of minerals, or is it electromagnetic interferences there? Not sure on that location.
I have a suggestion for you there, right? I'm not sure about specifically on Bold Street in this precise location. However, years ago, I did a relative comparison of Liverpool, Ohio, and Liverpool, England, and the many mounds that these two cities were built upon.
Oh, that adds a lot more credence to it, with the mounds and stuff like that, because a lot of times they're built on ley lines and these telluric currents. And
For sure.
I had a previous guest, Walter Bosley, where he talks about putting a carousel on a telluric point, like a cross on the 33rd parallel, which was in Disneyland. And he talks about how they developed it, not necessarily as a time travel per se, but it was to create this euphoric energy in that area. So when you go in there, you kind of lose sense of time and place, and you just really enjoy yourself. So,
for sure. And I think that I'm familiar with his theories on that. There's a lot to be said there, because years ago, when I first started getting into the mounds, I thought of these ideas of them being nodes right along these ley lines. And there are many Adena sites that I checked out in Ohio that I was able to find, comparative analysis from the U.S. Geological Survey. They did studies and show there are different energy patterns at those sites.
One thing about that, JJ, something that just occurred to me. So, do you remember the movie Jurassic Park, where the chaos?
I hope you're being facetious, sir. Of course, I remember Jurassic Park.
Well, okay. The chaos mathematician is talking about how the water will turn on the hand. Do you remember that part where he's hitting on that lady? Right. So he's hitting on her and showing her that the water is coming off in different directions, even though he left it on the same spot. Well, what if those bends in the river represent these different ways that water can turn based off of this chaos principle? And where do you find the mounds except at these bends in the river? Right? And so
high concentration. High concentration.
There you go. What they're trying to do is they're trying to encapsulate that sort of chaos energy. And what ends up happening is other towns are built on direct currents coming from those bends in the river, based upon the idea that these rivers contain the memory, right? So water containing memory is not something that's new, but it's something that is very, very old. And the idea of these water places, just like you were talking about when it comes to these residual hauntings, these water bends represent a change in that chaotic energy that then you can harness using these mound sites.
Interesting.
I like
Interesting
it.
theory.
Very interesting. And don't they find that rivers, even though they seem chaotic, they actually, all rivers have a certain mathematical system to them that's the same.
That chaos mathematics.
Yeah.
Cool. Now, we had talked. You had talked earlier about the people who went to that hotel, right? They went to that inn, and there was the lady there, and then they came back and she was not there, right? It was all gone. So this next story is the one that I wanted to mention that was very similar to that, and it's called. They nicknamed it the Vanishing Hotel in France. Okay, so this happened in '79, where two British couples were traveling through France, and they decided to stop for the night. They saw this nice, quaint, old-fashioned hotel, but they did realize that it kind of seemed to be like frozen in time. It wasn't right for the time period that they were in. Though it was charming. The hotel was charming, but it was very rustic. Like the keys were wood instead of like modern metal ones, and the staff were all dressed in like this clothing that was kind of from the early 20th century. Now, the rooms also lacked modern conveniences, like they didn't have phones or electric lighting, but both couples was like, they liked it. It was nice, and they said that the things were really, really cheap there, which kind of adds a little strangeness into this. Is like, how do they pay for it? But so that was their stay, and they continued on their journey. And they said when they returned back to the hotel on their way back, because they're like, I like this, let's stay there, they were unable to find it. They were on the same route, and they found no trace of the building or any of the locals. None of the locals had even heard of it, which really added a lot of mystery to this. And they had pictures, so they went and got their pictures developed, and when they saw it, the pictures were blank, as if like nothing was there. It was like all white. Like they got the pictures developed and there was just nothing on their pictures. They said like they had these interactions with the staff. They said that they kind of talked with an old dialect, but again, they just assumed everything that's just how it was supposed to be. So it kind of seems that like they found a place that crossed over. They either crossed over or this place jumped forward, and they had like this slip. Was it a time slip of them, or was it a time slip of the hotel? So it's some people have said that, oh, this is just a hoax, or they misremembered the event. I hate that when that happens, but they completely described it. They stuck to this, saying that no, this is what happened. They did not like, they never retracted their statements. They never changed that. They said, this is exactly what happened. And so you have multiple people. They had 4 people, because there's 2 couples that claimed this all happened. So it's really, really interesting. Was it the location, or was it the people, or was it both?
Well, I think there's a lot of interesting stories exactly like this, where people exit a portal, right? Like a door or some other sort of edifice, where they're walking out into something that is then totally different from the world that they're walking, from. Mm-hmm. And I think, there's this account on Instagram where she's constantly taking these stories about glitches in the Matrix.
Yeah. Anti-Matrix or something like that. It's called, yeah.
Right. But the idea there is that somehow between one layer and another, these different choices that you make, just like you were talking about, these branching multiple timeline ideas will take you to a different place. Mm-hmm. And you didn't really necessarily know it was there before. And sometimes this actually goes into a lot of this NPC theory too, this philosophical zombie, is that maybe the potential exists for this thing to be something else, but the characters there aren't really on the same level as the humans that we know and interact with. It goes back to the simulation theory. So what if there are people out there who are these sort of like pre-humans, And that takes me to I don't know if you guys have seen The Langoliers by what's his name?
The guy that killed John Lennon.
The guy that killed John Lennon. That's right. So
sorry, I thought it was. So you said The Langoliers. Wasn't that Stephen King?
the guy that killed John Lennon. That's right.
The guy that killed John Lennon.
I'm lost.
There's
a
a guy that drives a bus around America claiming that Stephen King murdered John Lennon.
Okay, now I got you.
So in the Langoliers, there's this idea of pre-time, pre-now, and then post-now, and then this post-now period has to be recycled by these creatures he called the Langoliers, which is really interesting that he chose the name Langoliers because in the upper Midwest, this is the New England area, they have this idea that the Langoliers are like these miners, and you'll hear them under the ground pounding away, taking minerals from under the ground, right? And so this idea of the Langoliers being this force that recycles time after the now is passed, then they come in and then they eat all of the different pieces. And if you're stuck in the later instead of the now, then you will be, consumed along with the rest of that material too. Yeah. Well, there's the idea that maybe we're constantly being recycled, and that would make sense if you're thinking about a multiple universe model. After things have happened the way that they've happened, somebody's got to get rid of the refuse. Somebody's got to get rid of all this other stuff. And if you think about maybe biological theories about multidimensional beings, why wouldn't that be a thing? Because, we're not existing on single planes ourselves. It's sort of like a non-local consciousness. Why wouldn't there be other things that exist on multiple levels only without our perception? Because we're always living in the now.
Now, I like the theory of the Langoliers in the sense of this post-time and pre-time, where you can kind of be out of sync with the actual frequency that it should be on. But if we say that the past is being consumed, then we should never be able to travel into the past itself. But this being out of sync, I think it explains a lot of things. I think it's quite possible that many people that we could be out of sync, and then we kind of like line back up and we come back into sync, which is back into the consciousness where I talked about that before. Now I'm gonna head on to the next one because I don't want to keep you guys too long, which is the time slip soldier from Scotland in the 50s. So in the 50s, there was a soldier stationed in Scotland, and he had an experience that haunted him for the rest of his life. He said that walking alone one evening, he heard this. He kind of found himself in a chaotic battlefield. He says the terrain was unfamiliar and the soldiers around him were wearing uniforms that he didn't recognize. He said he could hear sounds of explosions and gunfire, which was overwhelming. And he says before he could fully process what was happening, everything just kind of dissolved. So he kind of came back into his frequency again. He came back into his proper timeline. So he was disorientated and he was back on this quiet road where he had started. He said the transition was so abrupt that it says he felt like he was awaking from a vivid dream, yet he swore he could still hear the sounds of battle in his mind. Like, I swear to God, I could still hear this. So it wasn't just a hallucination. So he ended up, he went and found himself a historian, and he meticulously described the uniforms, the weapons, and even what the terrain looked like. And the historian was able to confirm that these details matched the Battle of Culloden, which was in 1746. So he was able to match it down because of the tartan patterns and the weaponry used in that clash. So that's how precise he was able to do it. And so they're able to say this is when it was. So he says that he just had to look in further into this. So he dove in so much. So he knew that was it. So the Battle of Culloden in 1746. So he started studying maps and firsthand accounts from the era, so he could actually place the exact location and the battlefield, so where he was, because he didn't just transport. It wasn't like he transported to that exact location that he was in originally. He transported to a different place. So not like the previous one where he was walking on in Liverpool and he was in the same spot. I believe that was in Bold Street. So he moved to a different place. So he was able to remember these landmarks, and he was able to find the exact spot where he was and this exact battle. So he says there was like a possible connection between his experience and the energy of the site. So it really lent credence to his belief that he stepped back into that critical moment in history. So it was very, very interesting. And so he also claimed that like he never changed his story, and he was able to prove it, by describing everything and by finding the actual location of where he went back, which is amazing.
Well, that brings up the Army of the 12 Monkeys. I don't know if you guys have ever seen 12 Monkeys. That movie is a trip, right? But there's also real life examples of the 12 Monkeys type phenomenon. If you look back, there's a case of a Spanish conquistador. Shortly after they conquered all of Tenochtitlan, there was this conquistador who fell asleep on duty and woke up in Spain. So he was right there. He was on duty. He leaned up against the pillar, and then he woke up back in Spain, and they had no idea how he could have done that. There's no way he could have made it across the Atlantic like that. But it's so strange that you would have that sort of time-space variance between there and there. And, it's a historical example of, well, there must have been a time slip,
Was it a time slip, or was it just a location slip? Like I wonder if there was any time difference in that, or if it was just location.
Time and space.
True.
True. These are linked.
True. Wow. All right, guys, I'm gonna do the last one, which I really, this is probably my second favorite, which is the Vanishing train in Italy, which was in 1911. So this train was carrying passengers, and it disappeared while traveling through a tunnel, maybe a portal near Lombardy, Italy. So the train was part of the Zanetti rail line, and it entered a tunnel, but it reportedly never emerged. Now, rescue teams found no trace of the train or its passengers. And years later, a few survivors reportedly surfaced with crazy, bizarre, and chilling claims. They said that they described the train entered the tunnel, and there was this intense white light that engulfed everything around them. And this light, they said, just wasn't bright. It felt like it was alive, and it was surrounding and isolating them in this like void. And when these passengers said that they regained awareness, they found themselves standing outside the tunnel, and they said it was, and this is kind of like the Langoliers. So they said that everything was silent and devoid, like there was nothing, and the train wasn't there, the other passengers weren't there. They said they felt very disorientated and just unsettled. So that would be like adding to the enigma that their memories of the event were fragmented, and the white light somehow interfered with their ability to fully comprehend what happened. So they have like these loss of time loss. So I think this really ties in a little bit with the Langoliers, kind of like, because there was only a certain amount of passengers that had fallen asleep on the plane, mind you, that they're the ones that traveled out of sync. Now, even strange is that there's reoccurring reports of this train has been sighted in various locations across Europe and also as far away as Mexico. So when you're talking about like that conquistador, leaning up, falling asleep, and being transported back to Spain, well, this is kind of along that lines as well. So witnesses always describe it as like this old-fashioned locomotive with silent, and the passengers are just blankly staring out. Maybe they're just stuck. They're stuck in time. And they said this apparition just appears and just vanishes just as suddenly. Just, just leaving uneasiness. People just feel uneasy when they see it. So could this be a spectral echo of this train, or is it trapped somewhere out of time and it's just bleeding into our reality every now and then? So who knows what that's coming? So this could be like you said, when you talked about the Langoliers before, that's why this one was, I'm like, oh yeah, wait till we get to this one. So it's very kind of similar of that, where they're just out of sync and they're just behind time. I believe they're just in the past there. So it's really, really interesting. I like that one as well.
Phase is so important. And once that drummer takes you off of beat, you never know what's going to happen.
Nope. No, not at all. Not at all. That's exactly, and when our consciousness somehow gets, or the frequency that we're tuned into somehow gets changed, or something is like covering it or misdirecting it or trying to make it
altered
invisible.
State of consciousness.
Yeah. And perhaps they're stuck in this altered state of consciousness for a second. And for us, it's 100 years, 50 years,
sure.
Could be anything like that. And it just,
sure,
for them could be a second, for us could be years. So there are my stories. Those are kind of that's my time slip and time travel. So, do you believe that these time slips are genuine? I do. I really believe I think that we don't understand time yet. We're trying so hard to, but some people are just stuck with their blinders on, and they just focus in on the mundane tasks. I got to get up, go to work, do this other thing, when there's so much more for us out there to see and to perceive and to try to break free of.
Well, I think that weight is really important, because you're saying almost like as you've got these blinders on, it adds to the weight of not willing to see these things. So you're almost more susceptible to being influenced by these time slips if you're not able to understand, hey, other people have been through this. All I have to do is keep my eyes on the prize and we'll be back to normal. So a lot of people might be fucking with things in the past that they really shouldn't be fucking with.
Yeah, and we're talking about the weight, though. It could also be like those people that are, they're stuck, like not stuck, but they're really solidly planted into this time, and they're not moving anywhere. And, when you got people getting high, whether you take DMT or any type of other thing, you're rising above and you're able to perceive more than what you should be seeing, because you're not weight, you're not heavy.
Well, what we end up doing is we end up thinking that our senses are the things that are supposed to be guiding us. But in these time slip scenarios, what we should be doing is using our cognitive abilities instead of thinking about, what are my eyes telling me?
Yeah.
Because if we're not doing that, we might end up, look at all these different events that have been changed, like the Berenstain Bears and all these other things. What if that's because of cosmic weather activities?
Yeah, electromagnetic activities that have bounced us over to another timeline where it is the Berenstain Bears instead of the Berenstain Bears, or it's Jiffy and or whatever else you want it to be, Fruit of the Loom with the cornucopia or not. It could be that we're getting bounced around by high electromagnetic frequencies, or CERN just ended the world and we had to actually jump over into a new timeline.
Right, you never know. I've got a short email, if you don't mind. I can throw that out there and then we can wrap it up. So this is from Jamie Ellis. I love the show very much, particularly the mailbag. I have what feels like a very mundane story from childhood, but my experiences was so profound I forgot about it for nearly 20 years. This was until I started looking into out-of-body experiences. When a year or two into my research, I suddenly remembered it. And not like remembering a joke or a trinket someone gave you once. I was there and I could feel it and see it again. The scene from my experience, I need to tell you. I lived in a small coal miners town south of England. I'd lived in this house my whole life. At the point guessing I was 10 or 12, my bedroom was at the back of the house, such that as I left the room, I would need to turn 180 degrees to the left on the landing to be looking down the stairs. At the bottom of the stairs, the steps went through a 90-degree turn to the left to go towards the living room, which had a closed door. This particular morning, as I woke up, I remember feeling this very subtle, odd sensation that I could not place. Without thinking about the sensation, I left my bedroom, and for a brief moment, I paused and stood on the landing. At this point, two things struck me. One, the feeling of the hot summer morning sunlight on my face and body coming from the front bedroom opposite me. Two, the warmth of the now hot sunlit carpet on the soles of my feet. At that time, I thought nothing of these sensations as they seemed perfectly normal. However, as I turned the 180 degree to go down the stairs, there was me. My body sat at the bottom of the stairs on my bum, how I often descended the stairs as a child, about to go through the door to the living room. As I looked at myself at the bottom of the stairs, corporeal me seemed to notice my conscious self, where I felt like I was witnessing reality from the top of the stairs, and turned around to look. I looked into my own eyes. I locked eyes with myself for a moment. Unfortunately, this is the end of my memory. I have tried for a long time to recall a resolution to the scenario, but I don't seem to be able to. In my childhood, I'd put this all down to a strange dream, but how it struck me later in life with such visceral memory of feeling and sensation, it tells me it was no dream.
That's interesting, especially able to lock eyes. I think that to make that eye contact, because we talked about eyes, I think it's very important, our perceiving reality, and she was able to lock eyes with herself. What was it? Was it a time slip, or was it a doppelganger, or what was it?
It's creepy.
It seems like a time slip, but it could be that doppelganger because she's not remembering perceiving herself from her former self. So there's this sort of out of phase reality right there.
Yeah, or is her from another reality crossing over into that reality and seeing that? So many questions. No answers. One answer. Wherever you get one answer, it's like 10 more questions. That's the way it always goes.
Absolutely.
Well, I definitely think there's something up with some of these stories for sure. I'm sure there's something there. There's something legit. Very interesting.
I agree.
Yeah. No. Very interesting stuff. Thank you very much, man. That was well put together. That was a lot of information. Wasn't actually expecting all that.
What's that? Sorry,
I wasn't expecting all that. Actually, that was a lot. Thank you.
I appreciate it. I know. I didn't want it to be basic. I wanted it to be a little in depth, and I might have went a little too in depth. But hey,
no, that was great. All
right, cool.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Please let everybody else know again where they can find all your stuff, Roy.
I'm on Spotify, YouTube, Apple. Twitter, formerly known, or X, formerly known as Twitter, wherever, Instagram, Facebook, just look at the name there, Rye. I'm sorry, the Codega. Codega's Codex of Curiosities. And hit me up, check it out, and subscribe. That's about it.
Nice. You have a link tree or something with all your stuff on it?
I do. I can fire that to you.
Yeah, awesome. Yes, I'll put that in the show links. And aren't you supposed to be going on Headless's show eventually too, soon in the future?
Yes. We were supposed to do that last week, but we had a little bit of an issue, so we're postponing it. We're doing it again. Yeah.
Oh, awesome, man. Awesome. I look forward to that. Great.
Yeah, me too. I don't know if we're going to talk dreams or what we're going to talk about, because I could fill a year's worth of content with dreams. Yeah.
That'd be great for that show. Awesome. Again, thank you very much, bro. You really brought a lot to the table, and stuff to think about.
That. I appreciate I appreciate that you appreciate it.
Yeah. Cool. And then real quick, I'll let everybody else replug their stuff again real fast. JJ Vance, let everybody know where they can find your work, please.
JJ Vance, host of Operation GCD, not the vice president. Thanks again, Nick. Headless Ethan, always good times. Rye, always great conversation, sir. Really enjoyed this one. And for your analogy with the record, perhaps I can recommend Hugh Everett III's son, his band, the Eels, the post-grunge British rock band. His son was the lead singer of that band.
Thank you very much.
Good times.
Yes, very much. Thank you very much, JJ. And now on to Headless Giant, sir.
Thank you. So this is a great episode. I love talking about time. It's so relevant. If you want to send me your weird stories about paranormal, about any sort of experiences you've had that just don't seem in place with the rest of your life, send it to me at the Headless Giant Podcast at gmail.com, and I will read them, and me and Nick will go over it. So, and also, guys, time is something to ponder. This is something to experience, you know? I mean, these are very important things. Even if we're inside of a simulation, you should really review this stuff because it's very important to not only you, but all the rest of us. We can find a way through this stuff. So let us know.
Well said. Yes, and definitely, please email him some stuff. Appreciate it. And last but not
y'all
least,
had a good one last week.
Yeah.
I may interject. Y'all had a good one last week.
Of course we
Cookie
did.
Monster Bigfoot.
Yeah. And what was that, rainbow trout or some stuff?
Possibly some wildlife crimes.
You're going to jail.
I thought that was hilarious. Last but not least, Ethan Indigo. My man, please let everybody know what's up.
Thank you so much for involving me with this, and thank you guys for all your ideas. Rye, that was an epic presentation. I'm on all the usual social media, so I always appreciate communication, and thank you for that.
Of course, and all his links will be in the bottom as well. And that is the end of another Occult Rejects. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.